Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa Ramadan Mubarak. Alhamdulillah. Thank you for joining us again in this continuing journey of the darkness and the light. Today we begin a third segment, and this segment is entitled Go-lieth, the Dajjal, and the Big Lie. Our spelling for Go-lieth in this series is Go-lieth, and Dajjal is Dajjal. And of course, you know how to spell the Big Lie. It's not always easy to find, but that's a part of our journey. The Big Lie. What we're doing is continue to pursue relevant information, guidance, we pray, for those who believe in God and in Scripture for the present world crisis. We're going to begin this segment reading two verses of the Quran, one from the chapter entitled An-Nisa, the women, the other from the chapter entitled Al-Baqarah, translated sometime as the heifer or the cow. From the chapter entitled The Women and Nisa, we're reading verse 76. We begin. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. الذين آمنوا يقاتلون في سبيل الله والذين كفروا يقاتلون في سبيل الطاغوت فقاتلوا أولياء الشيطان إن كيد الشيطان كان ضعيفا. And we say, Sadaqallah al-Azim, Allah the Mightiest has spoken the truth. An expression of this, the 76th verse of the 4th chapter of the Quran, is those who believe fight in the cause of Allah, and those who reject fight in the cause of the Taghut. So fight against the friends of Satan. Weak indeed is the cunning of Satan. The second reading is from the 258th verse of the second chapter of the Quran, chapter Al-Baqarah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. الله ولي الذين آمنوا يخرجهم من الظلمات إلى النور والذين كفروا أولياؤهم الطاغوت يخرجهم من النور إلى الظلمات أولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون. صدق الله العظيم. An expression of this, the 258th verse of the second chapter of the Quran, it says, Allah is the ally of those who believe. He brings them out from darknesses into the light. And those who disbelieve, their allies are Taghut. They take them out of the light into darknesses. Those are the companions of the fire, and they will abide eternally therein. Surely Allah the Most High has spoken the truth. Taghut is going to be our first focus. As we proceed, we're going to be doing all the tie-ins with Allah's help. And with Allah's permission, we're going to do all the tie-ins. But let's just go to have a grasp of Taghut. Taghut is very important, because that's who we're dealing with, right? It's one of the names for what we're dealing with. Taghut. Just some of the just simple dictionary entries for that term. It means to exceed a limit, to transgress, to wander from its orbit, meaning to get out of its lane, if you will. To exceed the bound, to be wayward, to rise high, to overflow, to rage, to go astray, to deviate, to be incurious, mischievous, impious, tyrannical, inordinate, rebellious, exorbitant, exceedingly wicked, insolence, injustice, lead to evil, to be overbold, stubborn, refusal to obey or comply with authority, extravagantly disobedient, immoderate, corrupt, top or the upper part of a mountain. It also means idol or demon, a source of wickedness. All of this is taghut. Abu Ala Maulana Maududi, rahimahullah, very, in fact, one who is believed by many to be a mujaddid. A mujaddid is a very special person that comes in very, very critical times of the Muslim world. He's believed to be one of the mujaddids. He has in his tahfim al-Quran, his understanding of the Quran, the footnotes that go to the subject matter bearing on the taghut. And we're going to spend considerable time until we have read through his footnotes on it, because as the old saying goes, no need to reinvent the wheel. His representation to us of the taghut is very important. And it's footnote number 286. We'll be reading footnotes number 286, 287, and 288, and all of them come from the reading that we have given. So reading the quotes from Maududi. He says, literally, taghut means anyone who exceeds his legitimate limits. In the Quranic terminology, however, it refers to the creature who exceeds the limits of his creatureliness and arrogates to himself godhead and lordship. There are three stages of man's transgression and rebellion against God. The first stage is that one acknowledges in principle that obedience to God is right, but disregards it in practice. This is fisq. It's the Arabic term, fisq. And the translation is transgression, fisq, transgression. The second stage is that one not only disobeys, but also rejects obedience in principle, meaning that I don't do obedience, right? Who also rejects obedience in principle and thus either refuses to become the subject of anyone at all or adopts someone other than God as the object of service and devotion. This is kufr. So he's giving us these terms. Kufr, the first one, fisq, that he mentioned, is transgression. The second he's mentioning here, kufr, infidelity. And there are other meanings, of course, to each one of these, but we're reading his citations. Then he says, the third stage is that one not only rebels against one's Lord, but also imposes one's own will in disregard of the will of God on God's world and God's creatures. You can see how the evolutionarily terrible the taghut is. And taghut, I would say, you should also understand this, like it's the attributes of someone who has become one of the friends of Satan, because this is what Allah tells us. He says they fight in the cause of the taghut, and he says fight against the friends of Satan. So taghut are the attributes of the friends of Satan. So all these qualities we're reading is where you see them, you are seeing the friends of Satan, and they are your just and ordered enemies from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now they seek to impose that. Not only do they disobey, they seek to impose their will against God's will over God's world and God's creatures. MashaAllah. Anyone who reaches such a point is termed taghut, and no one can be a true believer in God unless the authority of such a taghut, evil one, is rejected. So you have to reject all who come into that description. And as you probably have said to yourself already, these are precisely the forces that we are battling against, and these are precisely the forces that are seeking to impose their rejection of God and rejection of God's will. And now they are not only submitting to God and God's will, they are imposing their own will on God's world and on God's creation. May Allah protect us from it. Footnote 287 says, the darkness mentioned here means the darkness of ignorance, which throws man off the path of salvation and well-being, and directs his energies and efforts to wrong directions in defiance of reality. Light here means the knowledge of truth, because spend a lot of time, when time permits, on that. Truth is the key. Truth is the answer. But you got to know the truth. When you see it or hear it or find it, mashallah, or it finds you, inshallah. Light here means the knowledge of truth, with the help of which man comes to know his own reality and that of the universe. This knowledge also shows him the purpose of his life and thus leads him consciously to adopt the right way. That's coming out of the darknesses, coming into the light. You can see how special, how blessed it is to be in that place, if you can stay away from the Taghut and defeat the Taghut with the help of Allah. Footnote 288 from Maududi, rahimahullah alayh, he says, here, Taghut, and he refers you back to 286, says here Taghut has a plural connotation, means more than one thing, a plural connotation. It implies that by turning away from God, a man is subjected not to the tyranny of one, but to the tyranny of many tawaghit, evil ones. One of these is Satan. Who throws up new temptations and allurements. Another potential taghut, or transgressor, simple translation for taghut is transgressor. Another potential taghut is man's own animal self, which seeks to subjugate him to his appetites and desires. Let me just jump out of this, since it is Ramadan, and just remind us to stay connected. Where كتب أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. This is why we are fasting. We are fasting so that we can train our own self and enhance our own capacity to control our own animal passions and desires, so that we will not be tempted through them, we will not be overcome by them, because as the Quran says, many do mislead men by their appetites unchecked by knowledge. So we thank Allah for giving us the fast and blessing us to keep the fast. So it says one of the potential taghut is man's own animal self, which seeks to subjugate him to his appetites and desires. There are many more taghut in the world outside of oneself. You got your own inside, but you multiply that when you come outside of yourself and all the other things that seek to move you into that state. Continue Maududi's reading. He says, there are many more taghut in the world outside oneself, one's wife, one's children, one's relatives, one's family, one's community, one's friends and acquaintances, one's social environment, and one's people, one's leaders and guides, one's government and rulers are all potential taghut. Potential taghut. In every one of those features, in every one of those mentioned categories, there's some way that you can be overcome by. I'm not going to go through them right now, But just look at each and think about each category and think about the ways that we can be undone in those categories. Sometimes by loving them too much, adoring them too much, obeying them too much, etc. These things, they don't always lead us to the best. That is that behavior, nor the object of that service, affection, obedience, support, etc. Sometimes we get deceived by it. We become enablers for bad things and so many other in every one of those characters. This is how they draw us out of the light into the darkness. So it's darkness is zulumat, darkness is. He says each one of whom seeks to have his purposes served. We have some rich teaching in this that's coming. Those purposes, each one of them seeks to have his purpose served. Man remains subjected to these innumerable masters throughout his life, not knowing precisely whom he should please and whose displeasure he should avoid. And it's just so beautiful. It's like sometimes, let me see if we can touch on a couple. We're going to go ahead and end this first segment. It said one's who's first on the list? One's wife, okay, and flip it to the husband, right? So it's a question of, are you seeking to please them, and are you afraid to displease them, right? And it's right to have a little bit of both in the point of, you should seek to please your husband or your wife, and you should also seek not to displease your husband and wife. That's right. But when you talk about taghut, all of that can go to an extreme. You can be totally afraid to displease your wife, and if they're not in the right state, then they can use that in an oppressive way against you and pull you away from your duty as a Muslim believer. Or it can go the other way. You can be so disrespectful and so inconsiderate and insensitive towards them, where you have no regard for their displeasure, etc. So I'm saying, when you talk about pleasure, displeasure, when pleasure, displeasure gets out of balance in relationship to any of these, then you're in the territory to be taken out of the light into the darkness. They are in a position to become literally like gods and idols over you. But we thank Allah that He protects us from that. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. And of course, there'll be more to say in the next segment. Assalamu alaikum.